Greetings, geeks, and welcome to episode 486. Yes, you've heard me right, 486, a very special episode of Geeks in Space. I am Rob Commander Taco Malda, and I am joined once again by two of the greatest geeks that you are ever going to meet, who are going to pretend that they are in low Earth orbit when they probably should be doing something far more productive with their day. I have Chris DeBona.
Hello, everybody.
And Rob Roseboom.
That's me.
Today's episode 486, SX/100, my first 486, which I believe I got in 10th grade.
Yeah, I had a 486 DX2. I want to say it was 16 or 32 megahertz. I mean, it was some weak stuff. But I love that machine. It was in a tower case that was that awful cream color of all original computer cases.
Mine was a Gateway 2000.
Woo!
I know.
Those were a pain in the butt, though, because they would have, special connectors
Yep.
and special drive caddies that
Yeah.
was not very friendly to messing around it.
For sure. It was a super pain in the butt, and it was that chassis, or that system was my system for probably 10 years, just part after part after part. I mean, I replaced the case, probably like 2 or 3 years later, so it didn't look like the Gateway, but like one by one, every single system component got replaced, except maybe the power supply. The power supply probably lasted for the most of the decade. And honestly, that was the system that I used until I started switching over to Mac laptops.
Wow, that's really something. Yeah, no, the 46DX2 was the first machine I installed Linux on, I want to say.
Same for the 46100.
Yeah, man, that was a long time.
I took that machine with me to my to college, where Dave DeMage and I sat in our dorm room and installed Slackware together from stacks of floppy disks.
Yes, and we had onions around our belts because that was the style at the time, and you would trade 2 hard drives for a nickel, and they'd call it 2 hard drives for a bit.
If I remember correctly, the 486SX was just the 486DX that failed the math coprocessor burn-in.
Failed quality control.
I always like that. Let's make up for it.
I wonder if that's actually true. I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna look it up.
That could be urban legend.
Because I used to tell people that legend.
It feels true. It has a truthy quality to it. I think Stephen Colbert would at least approve.
Well, hey, okay, so here we go. It was a modified 46DX processor with its FPU disabled. It was intended as a lower-cost CPU for low-end systems. Let's see. Let's see.
Well, while you're reading that, hey Rob, do you want to talk about urine bread?
I mean, I guess we can. I mean, I know things are getting hard all over, and sustainability is a
Key.
key point.
Oh,
now,
I can't. Nope, I'm out.
Now, it's not as bad as you think, Chris.
I'm sorry. It is as bad as I think. Did you go through and look at where he got the? Yeah, no.
Yes, but
this is not okay.
It's not in the bread. They're just using it to fertilize the wheat.
Yep.
So basically, it's like, how there used to be night soil salesmen, and we decided to end that process in our farming because we don't like cholera and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Cholera's dumb.
Weird.
Yeah. So
This still smells bad. That's all I gotta say.
I'm not exactly sure how they're purifying the urine to fertilize the wheat.
I hope they're using clams.
Maybe. But according to the engineer who wrote the research paper on it, they can produce something like 10 times the amount of baguettes that are consumed worldwide now if they switch over to urine and save, hundreds of tons of fertilizer a year.
All of his friends call him the pea guy. They're like,
Yeah.
Are you going to talk about that again at our dumb bread conference? Is that what you're going to do? Because we don't want to hear it anymore, man.
I mean, I'm sure it would be interesting to look at his browser history.
No.
Nope. Pass.
No.
Sometimes interesting isn't pleasant, Chris. In this case, it might be one of those times.
How about that 486SX, huh?
I like the 486SX. Should we transition to open usage comments from Urine Bread?
No, we have things like the Arctic is.
Well, you got the Minecraft Twilight Tower you wanted to talk about.
Oh, I really want to talk about that. Yeah, so let's do that. Did you put it up?
I reloaded. Reload. I think it's up there now. You know, unless you want to talk about the fact that the Arctic is on fire again.
There it is. Okay, so I gotta tell you, I love this ride. This is my favorite ride at Disney World and Disneyland. I thought it was kind of cruddy when they made it a Galaxy, Guardians of the Galaxy reskin.
Mm-hmm.
But in Disney World, I think, and Disney Sea and Disney Shanghai, it's still the Tower of Terror. Oh my gosh, he even got the lines right. This is amazing. So I adore this ride so much. My daughter, the first time we went, she was like 12. She rode it 14 times on the first day and like 12 times on the second day.
Wow.
You know,
it must not have had a long line.
Well, it would have a long line at times, but I would save up the fast passes and I'd just give her mine. At some point, I was just like, after 7 times,
Yeah.
As a parent, you're like, I'm just going to sit in the picnic bench. You go ahead.
You know, one of the highlights of my childhood to this day continues to be, so Rob, you know Cedar Point. Chris, do you know Cedar Point?
Sure.
All right. So it's the roller coaster mecca for Jake and Elon. But they have one roller coaster there, the Gemini, and it's 2 wooden roller coasters that run in parallel to each other. And based on the weight of the riders of each car and however they got the brakes adjusted, one train might win the other. So it's sort of a race. And one of the highlights of my life was just it was 8 or 9 at night. The park was almost dead, and my dad and my brother and I would just ride it, then run full tilt from the end of the line, and you could basically catch the next train because there was no line. And as you race, you can lean over and like high five the other train next to you. And we must have rode that thing 10, 15 times in like 2 hours. And it was just like, it's just one of the best memories of my childhood.
That's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, things were different back in the day.
Yeah.
You could do stuff like high five someone on a roller coaster.
Right.
They were cool with it. Now, being deathly afraid of heights, none of that ever interested me. So,
Not big on the demon drop.
Tower of Terror.
yeah, amusement parks are less than amusing to me. So
You really wouldn't like Tower of Terror because the whole thing.
Yeah.
is
It's a
about
drop.
being afraid of falling.
I would absolutely hate it. Yeah.
I love roller coasters. I love drops. I love all of that. My children won't leave the couch, so that's just not going to be something. And my wife is scared of heights too, so I will probably not have the opportunity to ride a roller coaster again for a decade.
So I have to tell you, Rob, one of the great things about phones and tablets and spare batteries is it makes the lines at Disney World probably longer but tolerable.
Yeah.
For kids. And it's funny because like the first couple times I went, they didn't have devices really.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fine, but when they had devices, like it was like, it made the lines tolerable.
Kat and I talk about this a lot.
It's popular to say this, but it's like, honestly, if there were no devices, Disney World would need to get its crap together.
Right.
These lines are they're ridiculous. They're Soviet bred lines.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
so long.
Now, Kat and I talk about this a lot too, because there's a lot of tasks in life where you're like, all right, I'm not in the place I want to be. Like, for example, waiting in line at a doctor's office for a family member who you had to drive there. I'm not where I want to be, but I'm doing exactly the same thing as I would be doing at home, playing Candy Crush and reading, a newsreader. I mean, whatever.
Yeah, this is just, I'm going to watch this.
All right.
Look, they even have the lines set up.
See, I rode that ride. Assuming it's the same ride. I know it's had some retrofits, but I think I rode that in like 1990 or something, which is like the last time that I was at Disney, which was right when that park opened, the Hollywood Land Park or whatever. Mm-hmm. But back then, I think it was Hollywood MGM.
Hollywood Studios. Yeah, it was a deal with like one of the other studios.
Yeah, my favorite part of that whole park was they had an animation studio that you could do a walkthrough. And I mean, I love watching people draw their little cartoon characters.
They still have that. It's
I thought they shut that down.
A bit muted. No, well, maybe I'm thinking about Disney World. Yeah, I get it all mixed up.
Toxic hand sanitizer.
Yeah, let's go with that. That's a story for our time.
Was that you, Rob?
Yeah, but I mean,
Oh my goodness, that's awful.
yeah. So basically, with all the shitty information that's going out there, and we've talked about it many times. Putting UV lights inside yourself to drinking disinfectant. It turns out a lot of people have been drinking disinfectant.
Oh.
And there's a bunch of hand sanitizers out there that are particularly toxic. And unfortunately, lots of people have gotten sick and a bunch of people have died because they have decided that drinking this is a way to protect themselves. And it's not just drinking. Some of it's so toxic that they just get extra on their hands, touch their children. It's just...
This is terrible. No, so during Prohibition, when people would make their own alcohol and they'd forget to get rid of the heads and tails, they'd take a hit of methanol and they would go blind or they'd die, right? And then there were people who would poison, illegal liquor to punish people. And it's really brutal. It's terrible. Wow.
Yeah, basically the same thing, just brought on this time from the panic over the virus.
It's weird because, like, we joke about the labels on stuff. The warning coffee may be hot, which I know is a more interesting story, but we joke about, how stupid people need labels to tell them stupid things. And for the most part, that's not true. Stupid people don't need labels to tell them not to do stupid things. Lawyers need labels to prevent stupid people from winning lawsuits. But, like, it's hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that there are actually people that, like, think this is a good idea. Hey, but there's a nice thing. Gary Larson posted a new Far Side cartoon.
Oh, did he finally start?
Yeah. There's a couple of original pieces of art. His website's got some old stuff and a couple of new drawings. His style is mostly the same, but he's doing it on a tablet now. So there's a journal entry, and you can see in the image in the new comic that he did that he's doing a lot of like interesting modern coloring techniques. Where the olden days, I suppose it would just be like watercolor, and I don't even know if he did it. But he's learning how to use a tablet, and I don't know. I really groove. See, this is one of his new ones. I groove on the idea that he comes back after taking 20 years off and just starts doing the thing that he loves, but now he's doing it with modern tools, and that's cool. That's just dark, and I love it.
That's super dark.
Yep. But you know what the bears aren't eating is hand sanitizer.
That's true. Wow, that's great.
Anyway, I'm excited for it.
The few people look at this, you should just go and enjoy. Wow, that's great.
Yeah, he doesn't have much right now. But if he could just Penny Arcade maintains a 3-strip a week thing, and that always seemed like if you're a cartoonist, to get the 3-strip a week schedule, that seems like something that could be maintained without freaking out. The guys who do 7 days a week back in the era of syndication, that always struck me as a nightmare.
Yeah, I mean we used to make Zen here write 3 stories a week early in the game.
It was every day for a while.
That got a little hard.
Yeah, that got hard. It sure did.
We're releasing one a week right now?
About. If
we're releasing one a week right now, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, that all depends on if someone approves stories or not.
Oh, it's happening. Mom and Dad are fighting.
No, so the thing is, as the game gets better, we can lean less on the lore, and keep in mind how much lore have we written at this point? Mostly you, but
I'd have to look. I think I've written 350 stories or something like that.
Yeah, but it probably amounts to about 200,000 words. You figure?
Oh yeah.
Maybe more. But yeah,
It's definitely a long novel.
It's
creativity on demand, man. It's not easy to manage.
Yeah.
It isn't. It isn't. It's definitely a couple novels.
That's definitely something that like I've experienced, you know, when you have a writing responsibility. If you give me a writing prompt and say, "Hey Rob, go give me 750 words on this," I can bring you back that on any subject. But to actually come up with that first, what is it that you want to write about? I don't care most of the time. You know, like I don't have like a burning desire to write about most things. It's that impetus that's so hard.
Yeah, and the size of what you're writing matters too.
For sure.
Like most of our stories are like 1,500 to 2,000 words. And that gets a little bit harder.
So 3-4 solid pages. Yeah, that's a lot. All right. We were talking about Starship Troopers. A new article about Starship Troopers just showed up. We don't need to go into it or anything, but it pretty much is talking about the stuff that we were talking about the other day about Starship Troopers. It's a stunningly prescient little piece of filmmaking, and the guy basically is arguing that it's Verhaven's best film. He also cites it as being one of the best examples of the film version of source material contradicting the source material so efficiently. Like that's like the original is pro this thing and the movie is anti this thing, and it's like there's not a lot of times where that happens. But it's a cool article. I also put up a 3D printed Untitled Goose Game goose. But I only put it up because my wife mailed that picture to me and said she wants me to buy a 3D printer so that I can print her a 3D Untitled Goose. I'm like, you know, Uriah has like 8 3D printers.
Yeah, no, he can totally do it for you.
She has a T-shirt with an image like that. She loves the Untitled Goose Game.
It's kind of brilliant.
It is kind of brilliant. It's all over my house. My children loves it too. I had one other one on there before we get to your thing, Chris. There's an article booting a 486 from a floppy with the most up-to-date stable Linux kernel.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
And it's exactly what you would think it would be. There's no reason to watch the video. It's just a minute-long video of a PC booting. But he just talks about all the different flags and stuff that he had to do to actually get it to work. And I figured since this is episode 486, it was weirdly appropriate. But he had the thing that I thought was hysterical is that to build the kernel, he was running into problems because the BIOS on that system could only handle an 8 gig partition. It's like, what has an 8 gig partition in 2020?
Goodness.
Like my thumb drives are 64.
Wow. Yeah, and you see the syslinux boot. Wow, that's really neat. I love stuff like this. I got no beef. This is a good use of time. You know,
For sure.
Good on this guy. You know, and of course we were just talking about how my first Linux machine was a 486.
Yep. Are you familiar at all with the Mr. FPGA project?
I think so.
I've talked about it before. It's the gaming FPGA platform, but they have a module to emulate a 486 on that platform, and they're doing a little bit of cheating, like they're not emulating the entire system on the FPGA, because this is at the extreme edge of what of the number of transistors you need in order to emulate the platform. But I've been kind of thinking that it would be fun to build up a Mr. Box anyway. But I kind of think it would be cool if its standard state was just as a 486. Because I just like the idea of having a 486 around.
Yeah.
I kind of like the thing in me is that I want to be able to emulate every system I've ever owned. So I need a Nintendo. I need an Intellivision, I need a 286, and I need a 486.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking in terms of, okay, eBay has 486s, 386s for like nothing.
For nothing,
right?
yeah.
So You could get in there.
But I don't need, see, I'm not the guy that needs the original hardware. I just want the ability to access the stuff. And the FPGA seems like the good way to do that, because you can emulate all those platforms, but you're not really emulating them, right? You're transistor accurate simulating, I guess. And that makes my nerd happy. I think that was my last thing with, if you want to take us out on your topic, Chris.
Yeah, I just, I launched a thing, so with Clampy and a bunch of other folks. Excuse me. We launched something called the Open Usage Commons, and it's just a small thing where we're taking trademarks and trying to craft guidance in accordance with the open source definitions, so that if a project has a trademark, you can still use that trademark and the logos, just like you would the code and any patents and, say, an Apache licensed piece of software. It's a funny little corner of open source that we just sort of ignored in the early days, because most people didn't have trademarks on open source projects. And so, one of the things we've seen is people will use trademarks in open source software to basically proprietize that software and make it very difficult to use and to share and to hack on. So
the way we were talking about that earlier,
you should open source it.
We were talking about that earlier. We were talking about how in the medical industry they change the binder, and somehow they can get an extension on their exclusivity to a particular pill. I feel like the same thing gets done in this space by we changed the logo and now we get around the rules.
Yeah, it's people. The thing about open source, what I love about it, is it creates this magical third place where people can work together on a project without having to create. I mean, I've negotiated with universities and with companies, and it can sometimes take 9 to 12 months to hammer out a joint, working together deal thing. And I got to tell you, I got maybe 30 more years left on this planet. I do not want to spend one more month negotiating with some big company on what people can do with this thing or that thing in what is ostensibly an open source project. It's offensive to me. So I really wanted to do this, and so Google, my erstwhile employer, they stand behind me, and we put 3 projects into it. And
which projects
in the game? It's Istio, which is the service mesh thing in the world of cloud, and Angular, which is like a JavaScript framework.
People know that one.
They sure do. And Garrett, which is like a user management system for Git that we created for Android and is now being used all over the place. So if you're not so a lot of people think of GitHub and GitLab when they think of Git, but if you're a really big company and you're hosting it internally, GitLab's great, but you hit a point where you need really complex rules on how to submit code across the multiple repository model of Git. And so for Android, we really, really needed this, because we would have chipset vendors and handset makers and carriers, and they all wanted to talk to everyone else in the chain, including Google, but they didn't want to talk to other handset makers. Handset makers don't want to talk to other handset makers.
Sure.
And that also continues with the code that they want to submit to a project, right? So it's how do you architect a system where everyone can talk except for with the people they hate? And it's it turns out Git is the only system that can do it, and only if you have really good control over how users are able to patch and not patch. So we wrote Garrett. And do you know what the domain specific language is for putting together Garrett rules is? You're gonna laugh. It's Prolog.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah, so we embedded Prolog in Garrett because it was perfect for explaining relationships between repositories.
You didn't have any Fortran programmers handy to really go back?
You laugh, but we have some Fortran.
Oh, I would assume.
It's part of LM Bench, so at least it was.
I read a really interesting article recently on Fortran programmers, and they were the article basically came down to, look, man, if you know Fortran in 2020, it means you're hot, because you are so good that you're willing to do this. And like you had to have learned 5 other languages before you get around to the project that makes you code Fortran. So you're good. I always liked that idea. I have never coded Prolog. That's not true. I wrote one thing in Prolog in college. So do you have like our
week of the comparative programming languages class is like, and this is Prolog, and now you're never going to see it
right,
ever again.
Right. Except that one of those languages ends up being Lisp, and then you're like, you're going to see Lisp like 7 times a year for the rest of your life, and every time it's going to annoy you.
So you know how I had like a 10-year break between my penultimate and last class in my computer science
Yes.
bachelor's, because I wasn't a great student, right? And then when I got to Google, and I remember I was in a meeting with Peter Norvig, and I've told this story to him, so it's okay. And I was like, Peter, Peter asked my weighty opinion about something, because it was about the April Fool's, not April Fool's, it was the end of year report on what people were searching for and that kind of thing. This was like 2004, 2005.
The Zeitgeist.
Yeah, the Zeitgeist and the Google Geist or whatever. I don't know. Anyway, so Peter asked my opinion about something, and I'm just like, Peter is asking my opinion. Like, do you want me just to pick up your cleaning or wash your car or something, right? And then after that, I was like, I'm probably the least educated person, not just in this room, but at this company. Because everyone was just like these computer scientists and brilliant programmers, and I was like, maybe I should get my degree, right? So I called my college and I was like, hey, can I take the AI class remotely? They're like, I don't know. Do you have anyone at work who can like proctor your exams? And I'm like, well, there's Peter. They're like, wait, Peter Norvig? And I'm like, yeah. They're like, he wrote the book. And I'm like, I know.
So give me my degree.
Well, no. And so I took this class, and it was artificial intelligence, right? Back then it was mostly search and sort, and it was also in Lisp, right?
Ooh.
So I remember writing Lisp for that, at night for that semester, and I wrote this because they wanted you to write a calculus solve, right? And so I wrote one, but I didn't really understand Lisp. Okay.
That's easy. That's an easy problem to get into.
No. My problem was when they said that Lisp is all about, encapsulated parentheticals, right?
Yeah.
I took it too far.
Oh.
Like, the whole program was basically one line. I mean, with line breaks, but it was basically one parenthetical, right? And it didn't just do basic calculus solving. It did partial differential equations. It did all this stuff. And like my teacher like wrote me back. He's like, no, this is stop. You're getting an A, but don't do this again. He's like, you can use multiple lines in Lisp, right? And I'm like,
what?
I'm like, you can, but that doesn't sound very Lispy,
Right. I thought the goal of Lisp was to make it so impossible to read that one missing parenthesis in the midst of your 7,000 lines would end your soul.
It was absolutely brutal. Anyway, so I wrote this great program, but he was like, you can't, just don't do this. You don't have to do this much work. He's like, at least I know you didn't just copy it from someone on the internet, because nobody would do this.
Right. So the humble brag is that you tried too hard and you were too awesome.
Yeah, and I ended up getting an A in the class. And then I got my master's, and I was a scholar. There you go.
I always like the story about how Steven Spielberg, I can't remember if it was his doctorate or his master's, that he never finished, and then he ended up submitting Schindler's List. It's like, all right, that's how I graduate film school.
Yeah, it's like, does this count?
Right, I only won all the Academy Awards. Yeah. All right, folks, we've hit the half-hour mark. We're doing Real Genius this week, or next week, I guess. I'm actually very excited. And Chris, I expect you to have like a slideshow or something ready for us.
Yeah, I'm gonna try. I adore that movie.
But you have a lot of important work to get done this week too.
Yeah, whatever.
All right, you said it, not me.
Just launching a new thing. It's just a little thing.
Just a little thing. Just a little.
It's exhausting, honestly. I mean,
right?
I really like this podcast and stuff with y'all, but there's a point where you're like 4 analysts and 3 reporters into something like this, and you're like, I know I just have to get past this step so I can just do the work, you know, but it's exhausting sometimes.
For sure.
Oh, sure.
Well, let's say goodbye to Rob Roseboom.
See you, everybody.
And goodbye to Chris DeBona.
Goodbye.
Good luck with your thing.
Dream about the Tower of Terror.
Oh, yeah. Faux show.
So good.
This has been episode 486 of Geeks in Space. I'm Rob Commander Taco Malda. I hope you have a lovely day, and we'll see you Friday.